Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brett Perlman, CEO of the Center for Houston's Future, and welcome to our Energy and Climate webcast series. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Center, we aim to convene business, government, and community stakeholders to address the most important issues in the greater Houston region through strategic planning and collaboration. And this year, we're running two webcast series, our Energy and Climate series today, and also our series on leadership in the post-pandemic world, which you'll hear more about at the end. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers, two friends and colleagues who I've known for many years and very pleased to have them join us. First, Gavin Dillingham, who is Director of Clean Energy Policy and is Director of the Department of Energy's South Central and Upper West Combined Heat and Power Program. He joined HARC, the Houston Advanced Research Center, in 2012. And he's also involved with a new startup called Pythia Software, which we'll maybe hear about a little bit during the broadcast today. So Gavin, welcome to the webcast. And I'd also like to introduce Peter FoxPenner. Peter is a noted author and founder of the Institute for Sustainable Energy at Boston University, where he's professor of practice at the Questrom School of Business. He is a partner and chief strategy officer at Energy Impact Partners, one of the largest dedicated clean energy private equity funds in the world. And he served in a number of roles at the Department of Energy and the White House, and very happy to have Peter join us today. We'll have time. We'll try to interject question and answers into the discussion. So please put your ideas and questions into the chat, and we'll try to integrate them into the discussion as we move forward through the hour today. Gavin, welcome, and Peter, welcome. Glad to have you both here, and thank you for joining us. Looking forward to a great discussion. Gavin, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Brett, and very much appreciate the opportunity to come here and join this series. And very excited to talk with Peter here. As Brett mentioned, we are part of a startup here with Pythia's Analytics, and always excited to talk about what's happening in that space. In any case, wanted to really welcome you, Peter. Thank you for joining us today. And as Brett mentioned, you do a wide variety. You have a wide variety of different hats that you wear, from chairman of the Brattle Group to, chief strategy impact officer at EIP. So just wonderful background that you have developed here, and we'd like to just learn more about what you're up to. What's happening at Energy Impact Partners. What do they do? A little more about what's happening at Boston University's Institute for Sustainable Energy.
Well, thanks, Gavin, and thank you to Brett and Laura and everybody for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here, and pleasure to have Brett as a senior fellow at the Institute for Sustainable Energy, and a colleague over many, many years, stretching back to our Mitchell Foundation work a decade ago or more, and hopefully more in the future. I appreciate you, asking for a little bit of background on what I'm up to. As Brett mentioned, I'm the founder and the director of the Institute for Sustainable Energy at Boston University, which is a university-wide multidisciplinary think and do tank, does research on all aspects of sustainable energy. It's where I did my recent book, Power After Carbon. And we have lots of research projects going on that you can see on our website across the whole sustainable energy landscape, from decarbonizing industry and manufacturing, which we hope to be working with you all on, to water and energy work, which of course our colleague Mike Weber worked on at UT, and we also do transportation electrification, and a lot on energy systems themselves and the electric grid, which is of course the subject of Power After Carbon. At Energy Impact Partners, I'm Chief Strategy Officer. We invest in companies that play a role in the clean energy transformation. We are a completely clean energy focused fund. I think the deepest team in that space worldwide in clean energy investing. We've invested in 2 Texas companies, Innowatts and Enchanted Rock. A shout out to them. We have a wide variety of investments from transformative generation technologies like Enchanted Rock and Form Energy, all the way to energy analytics firms and cybersecurity firms like Dragos, leading the protection of the power grid. And finally, I do continue to work at Brattle Group as an academic advisor, but not as chairman, as Brett mentioned. I was privileged to serve as chairman, but Brattle Group has an excellent new chairman, and I look forward to working with her.
Wonderful, and just I'm excited to mention that you mentioned Enchanted Rock. We've worked with them in the past, and actually we were just on the phone with HEB, where they've installed several of their systems across the state, and just great to hear about that type of innovation that's happening, and just those kind of innovative business models that are coming to the market and really helping to improve resilience of our power system as well as reliability. So it's exciting to see that just has national interest to some degree and is really, you know, kind of a homegrown institution here, and so great to hear that. And so as you kind of discussed and laid out all the areas in which you're working, you're just really, you know, become that expert on just what's happening in the future of our energy grid. And you had your Smart Power book that came out back in 2010, and your most recent book, Power After Carbon, which came out last year, which I very much enjoyed reading. I just finished it up a few weeks ago. Based on those books, can you give us kind of an idea of those, especially those that aren't familiar with the electricity grid and the power grid, an overview of the trends that you saw back in 2010, and, you know, what changes occurred to really make you write your most recent book, the Power After Carbon book? How do you kind of see the grid transforming there?
Well, I'll start off by saying, Gavin, that the biggest trend I saw was that everything that was my thesis in Smart Power, which I wrote in 2010, turned out to be only exactly half right. And so I felt like
that's better than sometimes. Yeah.
I needed the correct record. Well, it's about the expected balance for any two-armed economist to be half right. The thesis in Smart Power was that utilities were in for a very, very rough sort of perfect storm or train wreck, because I did see decarbonization coming, which I thought was going to be extremely expensive for them. They had to decarbonize their generating fleet and redo the distribution and transmission system, which we'll talk about, I hope, you know, to make it a smart two-way grid and just expand it. And at the same time, I saw sales flattening out, which I was right about for the last 10 or 15 years, but I think I'm wrong in the future. Anyway, I saw sales flattening out, big investment needs, and lots of disruptive technologies going to attack their core market position. And I thought that was going to hurt the clean energy transition that we needed to go to, because I think utilities play a very important anchor role. They don't play the only role, but they anchor the system. They anchor it financially, they anchor it politically, believe it or not, and they anchor it technologically. So that was the thesis of Smart Power in 2010. If you fast forward to I guess it's more than 10 years, to 2019, when Power After Carbon came out, decarbonization or climate change had really risen in importance as a more urgent driver of change in the industry. But what accompanied it is a change in the forecast of electricity demand away from flattening out, which would really put a revenue pressure on the industry that I thought would be fatal or could be fatal, to turning climate change as policy, as it turns out, is going to be the single most important change, positive change to the electric power industry, including the utilities, that since the birth of the industry, it's going to cause I think at least a doubling of the size of the industry between now and 2030, which is an inflection point in an industry whose sales had been going down and are going down in some parts of the country due to energy efficiency, which is a great thing for the environment, but not good for revenues. It's a huge change. So those, maybe I'll stop there. Those changes alone were enough to prompt the book. So just to finish up, the thesis of the book is the industry is going to have to completely decarbonize. Climate policy is becoming important, but unlike my worries in 2010, the prospect for sales growth is extremely certain, all but certain, that there are going to be substantial sales growth. And complete decarbonization looks not only technologically possible, but very economically affordable, which I did not see as clearly in 2010. So a really substantially changed landscape, prompting Power After Carbon.
Prompting the next book there, absolutely. And it is pretty amazing how dynamic this industry's been. There had been a lot of projections about that decrease in growth and opportunities, and I think it caught a lot of people off guard as far as how this grid is going to transform and the trends that we anticipate coming to fruition here. And one of the specific chapters you have in that book is, and this is kind of follows along the same line as far as this potential revenue growth, is the future is electric. And so we talk about at HARC, where I direct the energy folks over there, we talk a lot about electrification of everything, essentially. How do we electrify things and decarbonize the grid at the same time? So, why is electrification the prevailing strategy to decarbonize our economy? Why do you kind of see that as one of our key areas we need to focus on?
Right. Well, I wouldn't call electrification the sole prevailing strategy. I think that's a simplification. If you or any of our viewers and listeners have seen any of my slide presentations on Power After Carbon, and there are many up on the BUISC website, I basically describe electrification as one of the pillars of climate policy, for certain. So electrification means electrifying the end uses. That's one of the pillars. The next pillar is doubling the size of the industry, which means has two parts to that I think each deserve discussion. One of them is doubling generation, well, that's distributed generation or large-scale generation, and the other is increasing the infrastructure, the electric infrastructure, to accommodate that. Energy efficiency is a pillar unto itself, and is really, really essential. We could talk about that in a distinct question. And non-electric decarbonized sources are a pillar that in total is roughly of the same order of magnitude as decarbonized electricity. Now, that's hydrogen and renewable gas and many other decarbonized fuels that I think we'll be using. And those are becoming increasingly important in the public policy discussions now, in the infrastructure discussions in Washington and so on. So, and then finally what goes along with that is an infrastructure that goes with those fuels that will have to tie to electricity. So maybe I'm up to 6 pillars like the Greek buildings in your Pythias creation. That's a lot of pillars, but it will take a village to decarbonize our full economy.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And there had always been that, or there's always that desire discussion to find that silver bullet. What's that one opportunity that can really, make sure we make the most significant progress? But a lot of it's going to be a lot of different pieces and parts, a lot of changes on the supply side, on the demand side, and really kind of making sure we look at all these potential opportunities and really investigate that further. And as we look at, kind of the transformation and the expansion of the grid and expansion of these opportunities, you talk a lot about the small grid versus the big grid. And so the distributed energy resources, community energy systems versus the utility scale systems. And you make a strong argument in your book that they, both need to be in place, and there needs to be better coordination and visibility. So what do you kind of see, looking out to 2050, what the grid could look like when we talk about this growing interaction between the small and the big grid? Because at this point, you look at some of the ISOs for ERCOT, for example, and there's kind of not a whole lot of good transparency and visibility of what's happening in the smaller grid and what's happening with the DERs. And so it looks like there's a lot of stuff that kind of needs to start happening to ensure we have that good coordination and that good, solid, robust development on both sides and both of those scales.
Right. Well, there's a couple of questions in there, so let me try to peel them off one at a time. First of all, and the first thing I think about is the magnitude of the resource, just to make sure that we're going to have enough fully decarbonized energy to power a substantially electrified future economy. And I believe and hope that we will. So for the magnitude of distributed energy resources, and here I'm talking about sources first, are very significant, but as I argue in the book, just not enough to take care of this extremely large increase, roughly doubling of our use. So there's data in the book on the amount of electricity, just the sheer quantity we can generate from increasingly efficient solar panels, because they are getting better, and in some cases, smaller wind turbines that can be sited locally, and a few other distributed sources. Now, keep in mind, batteries and vehicles, electric vehicles, are not sources. They're very important distributed energy resources, but they're not going to create the kilowatt hours that we're going to consume. So just in terms of sheer creation, if you look at all the resource that looks like it will be economically usable, that's all the roof space, and even some of building skins probably by 2050 we'll be using, we will get a substantial fraction of our electricity from those sources, but nowhere near all of what we need. And that's just in raw sources. So that's what leads me to sort of argue in the book that we're going to need both. We're going to need to expand the big grid. And also, I take the view that we should get everything we can get from distributed resources because they're local, they create jobs locally, they're inherently resilient because they're local and there's less wire between us and our sources. So I take that as sort of a given, and then, but I still kind of think on net, we need a lot of supply. Now, the other layer of your question has to do with, and in terms of magnitude, maybe I should give some magnitude here for everybody. You know, in all of the roof space in the city of Boston, where my institute is, according to NREL, if we use every available roof space that we think exists, that we know exists now, we could get about 16% of our total, Boston's current total electricity use. If you double that, it's 8%. And the data on the expansion of roof space between now and 2050 in Boston is there isn't going to be a lot of new roof space. At least 85% of all of the buildings that are going to exist in 2050 in Boston, we think exist now. We took a hard look at that in our Carbon-Free Boston work that is on the BUISC website. So you're in the ballpark of 8% for, you know, one of the 12 largest cities in the United States. And the overwhelming majority of our electricity is used in our cities where roof space is scarcest. Right. Now, that's sort of at the low end. I think other cities will get up to easily 20% of their energy by 2050 locally, but that still leaves you 80% that you need. Now, the second big layer of your question has to do with integrating all this, you know, let's say 10 to 20% of our energy, maybe not quite that much, but somewhere in that ballpark, with the rest of the grid, and not only integrating those sources, but the resources, the storage capacity and flexible load that also those will reside in the city. Millions of car vehicle batteries in 2050 that can be managed by the grid, and gigawatts of building flexible load, sort of smart buildings that communicate with the grid, will be in those cities. And those will be giant gigawatt scale resources in the aggregate that need to be managed by the large scale grid. And that has to do with technical architecture and new software. At Energy Impact Partners, we invest in several software companies like Opus One that help utilities manage those resources and get visibility into those resources so they can become virtual power plants, or more important, just flexible load. And so there's a technological dimension to this that has to do with smart grid software. And there's also a market dimension that the FERC really spoke to in Order 2222, which is going to take years to implement, where those resources can be aggregated and bid into wholesale markets, as well as used locally. And I want to emphasize that there is a lot of value in those resources locally, and those utilities will play a real key role. The local utility will play a key role, I believe, as local market maker and local manager. And in many cases, those resources will be as or more valuable locally than they will be sold upstream, where prices, as you know, Gavin, can go negative or be low for long periods. Right. So sorry for that long-winded answer, but it was an important question, and no, I hope I didn't overdo it.
No, not at all. And that was a very nice explanation. And you brought up several other questions that, as I kind of think through this area. And you know, you mentioned about all the roof space in Boston, and as I drive through Houston, especially north of Houston, 290 out towards that direction, the Beltway, you know, I see all these large distribution warehouses and just all this open roof space. And I know, you know, it's not going to get us completely where we need to be by any means, but it just seems like it would be a great use of unused space to some degree. And I'd be curious to know, you know, as we try to improve resilience, as we try to work towards decarbonization, you know, what are some of the business models we may need to be looking at, or what are some of the soft costs that we still need to be focusing on to make that more viable? Is it you know, are we close to that, or are we still some major hurdles to really make that kind of large scale distribution viable?
Well, rooftop solar has its own sort of needs for reducing soft costs and sort of improving interconnection policies with utilities, and reducing soft costs is part of it. However, rooftop solar remains extremely popular. It continues to get cheaper and more cost effective for businesses and just individual family homes. And I I say in the book that, my expectation is that it won't be long before pretty much all new single family, all new businesses, all new dwellings that have access to significant solar resources will just automatically include solar systems and bundle them in with the mortgage, which is probably in many cases the best way to finance them. But there are better and better models. And Energy Impact Partners, we've invested in Mosaic, which improves the access to energy financing for low-income households, which may not have high FICO scores. Same with Arcadia, another one of our companies. So business models are helping this. And the technology that helps reduce soft costs gets better and better. We use Google Earth now instead of rolling a truck out to most homes, and the racking systems and installation systems gets better. And integrating solar systems with storage, which continues to drop in price, creates additional value stream for families and businesses that's extremely important, even if it's only 4 hours of power for part of your load, or 16 hours of or more for your critical loads. That's driving a tremendous amount of solar installation now, and that's all good.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we talk about soft costs, Secretary of Energy Granholm was here a few months ago and mentioned the solar app that was being developed by NREL. And we've been working actually with the city of Houston to get that solar app as part of kind of the permitting process, because that seems to be one of the significant hurdles, at least as far as delaying the implementation in the Houston market there. So it looks like there are continuing to be more innovations, more ways in which we can get solar deployed, especially in low-cost energy markets such as in Texas and in Houston. And one of the things you mentioned as far as bringing that solar plus storage, and I don't want to go too deep in the weeds, but one of the things we've been kind of thinking about with you have all these solar plus storage systems out here. You have a retail electricity provider. How does that aggregation start happening potentially, where they can take that power, sell it back to the grid, and kind of that virtual power plant, or that the kind of see how that starts developing in a deregulated market. And I know that's kind of getting way out there in some of the weeds, but I'm just curious to get your thoughts as far as maybe some of those aggregation processes for these distributed energy resources, and if that has a viable option in the near term, or how you can see the opportunities for that playing out.
Well, I think we are seeing more and more aggregation of loads and flexible loads, as well as other resources. It's a complicated business model because anytime you're aggregating lots of small things and you have to reach all of them, you have to be very careful of your soft costs, right, and your overhead costs, and you're arbitraging between them and a market that's volatile. So the economics can be a little bit challenging, and the market structure has to accommodate it. That's why FERC implemented Order 2222. Exactly. It has not, to my knowledge, been implemented yet. It's quite a ways from being actually going live, so that you can't do it in RTO, most RTO markets yet. There are a few folks who are doing it on using larger loads. Right. So it's definitely going to happen. It's in the pipeline, but it's not a broadly applicable app yet. I guess it's the most I can say about it, Kevin.
Oh, definitely. And it's just, we've continued to hear, just kind of discussions of what does that opportunity look like? And there is, several additional steps and, things that have to be done in order to move that piece forward. But as we look in, what are the different opportunities near to midterm, seems like it could be something to continue to pursue. One of the things that's really kind of near and dear to me is kind of on the energy efficiency side. That's really where I got my start in kind of the energy side of business. I worked, with under the White administration, the Mayor White administration in Houston, on doing some major energy efficiency projects across the city of Houston, and running the weatherization program for low-income housing, and so a variety of great opportunities around energy efficiency for kind of cost-effective decarbonization. How do you kind of see energy efficiency playing the role for kind of decarbonizing our grid? What do we need to do to kind of bring in more energy efficiency? And you kind of touched a bit on grid flexible buildings and demand response, but just kind of curious to see how you see energy efficiency playing a role in really kind of impacting the market.
Well, I'm glad you raised that, Gavin, because it is the first pillar of every developed world climate strategy. And it's the first pillar of many state strategies. And I think it is the first pillar of the Biden administration's climate strategy as well, to their credit. I was looking back at my section of the book on this topic, and I was once again just blown away by some of the reports that I cited. The American Council on Energy Efficient Economy, ACEEE, a group that many of us know quite well, and a very, very good group, looked at this question and pretty much said between now and 2050, with strong energy efficiency measures, basically electricity use for all of our current end uses could be basically would not grow and would decline slightly between now and 2050, which is amazing, since the economy is going to almost double between now and 2050. So that gives you a sense of the tremendous potential that we have. Now, on top of all of our current end uses, we're going to electrify quite a bit of our transportation system. I think the vast majority of our light duty system will be electrified. So that adds new load to the system. We're going to, I hope, electrify quite a bit of industry. Hopefully, I'll be working with Brett and his team on that. And Houston, I think, will be a great beneficiary of that. We'll talk some more about that later. So efficiency alone won't, I think, obviate the need to expand the system, but it will provide as much or more energy services as all the trillions of dollars that we invest in this. And we know it's a great job creator locally. So what do we need to do there? This is no surprise. Gavin, I'm sure you worked on every one of these things under Mayor Bill White, who I also had the pleasure of working under. Stronger building codes, which save consumers money. Appliance efficiency standards, which tragically the last presidential administration reversed or stalled, would save customers billions of dollars. I mean, when you think, Gavin, you know this fact, when you think that American refrigerators are 30 or 40% larger than they were in 1970, and they use 70% less.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's incredible. And the efficiency runway is by no means over. At Boston University, they're working on LEDs that, believe it or not, they use 1/10 of the energy of current LEDs.
Right.
It's inconceivable. Heat pumps, we did some work on heat pumps to look at advanced manufacturing. There are all kinds of heat pump and electric drying technologies that, as efficient as heat pumps now are, which is they can be as much as 1/3 better than electric furnaces or better. There's another 30, 40, 50% efficiency gains to be. So better building codes, appliance efficiency standards, R&D, demonstration, the full suite of policies that we've been pursuing at the federal level and in some good states, but never as much as the potential, cost-effective potential has allowed.
Yeah.
Utility energy efficiency programs, which have been extremely successful and cost-effective with 2-cent energy services. So the toolkit is well known. We just need to use it. And there's quite a lot of this in the new infrastructure and reconciliation packages, fortunately. And hopefully we will pass these really important bills and really expand energy efficiency by an order of magnitude.
Yeah, you're absolutely, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm just saying it goes hand in hand with electrification.
Yes.
And this gives really two of the major pillars of national energy policy and two of the major pillars of strategy for the utilities in the United States.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And just a little anecdote on two different success stories for energy efficiency, because people just need to understand how much of a difference it can make. So my house, for example, we just put in a new air conditioning system. I haven't paid a bill over $100 all summer yet. And it's just because, it's well insulated. It's a 40-year-old home, but it's well insulated. It's, new AC, new, building envelope work and all that. And it really makes a huge difference, improves the comfort of everybody and lowers your operating cost. And HARC, where I do the clean energy work, we have a net zero LEED Platinum building, the first commercial net zero building in the state of Texas. And we haven't paid an electricity bill in the last year and a half. And so in hot, humid Houston, Texas. So, I mean, there's very much ways in which to do energy efficiency in a cost-effective manner that leads to big dividends. And as you said, as we do more electrification, it's very important that we take these steps for energy efficiency and really hit into those deep energy or efficiency retrofits and really kind of push that along. So just to kind of switch directions a little bit, kind of going focusing more on the Texas grid. And there's been a lot of discussions around that, especially since February. But one of the things that I really wanted to talk with you a little bit about was really understanding, when we're looking at the big grid, those risks, those extreme weather risks that we're seeing in the big grid. And you mentioned in several of your posts in the past, you've mentioned your favorite band, Earth, Wind, and Fire, as far as being some of those major risks for the power grid. And when you actually look at the state of Texas, you look at NOAA's tracking of extreme weather events. Of the 6 they track, all 6 happen in Texas. And so I'm just curious to what can we do within the state of Texas and just the grid in general to really kind of better mitigate that risk, and how do we deal with those types of dangers to extreme weather risk, whether it's hurricanes or flooding or fires or whatever that looks like?
Well, I guess everything's bigger in Texas, Gavin, including the climate crises. And that's not really a joke, because they're very serious, life-threatening, life-taking events. And I am sorry about them and didn't mean to joke about them. But what can we do about them? First of all, I guess I will say that nothing is 100% preventable. So we're never going to get 100% resilient, perfect, reliable energy supplies of any kind, electricity or any other form. So we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There's a whole suite of things that need to be done. So starting up at the generator level, obviously, I think you all need to be more careful in weatherizing your plants, creating large-scale generation that is climate resilient. And I do want to emphasize that it is very, very well documented that the renewable energy systems were not the source of the winter crisis in Texas. They performed pretty much at par. I think wind was off by 2 gigawatts and natural gas was dropped by 25 gigawatts. And that was the source of the shortfall out of 77 gigawatts of demand. Renewable energy, although its variability has to be treated in the whole architecture of a grid, it was not the source of the tragic events of the winter storm. But all of the energy resources need to be weatherized and hardened as much as they can, including their whole fuel supply chain, natural gas supply, not the plants themselves were a big issue. All that needs to be winterized and also summerized, that is protected against extreme heat. And there are technological ways to protect sources from that. Transmission, the large scale grid, also needs to be protected against weather extremes. That's often called grid hardening. And there are many technologies that are adapted to do that. It's hardening against extreme heat, against wind, against ice. There are lots of threats to the large scale grid. Another important resilience vector is more interconnections and more grid. I know there's been a discussion about ERCOT needing more interconnections. I think it should look at it. I think it should be more interconnected. And I know that Southern Cross is under discussion. Brett mentioned that with our longtime colleague, Mike Skelly. And I hope that gets looked at, and probably from general principles. I can't comment on that one particularly, but for general principles, interconnections almost always pay off in resilience benefits as well as economy interchange benefits. And that's particularly true when we need to decarbonize the system. So then we move down to the small grid, as I call it, and there microgrids, more storage, hardening the distribution system, putting in better smart grid intelligence so we know where the outages are, and we can move our resources more efficiently. There's a whole suite of resilience technologies and software that are important. So it's all of the above in that suite.
Yes, absolutely. And and we can go back to our energy efficiency discussion as well, and discussions of how important it is to have a well-insulated and energy efficiency home for that passive survivability that could happen when there's a major power outage event. We saw how quickly homes went into the 30s and 40s over that winter storm period. And I think there's some great opportunities in that regard as well, to just focus on that demand side again and make energy efficiency a top priority.
Right.
So kind of a discussion here about still remaining in ERCOT and kind of talking about what's happening in kind of the ERCOT market these days. And back in 2013, you did a report with the Brattle Group, and Mitchell Foundation supported it, kind of looking at the future of the ERCOT power sector. And in that report, you concluded that the system's going to, and I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit, the system's likely to have a substantial amount of both renewable energy and gas-fired power in the next coming decades. And so this is 2 decades, and this was from 2013. And a lot of that's because the economic and environmental attractiveness of these electricity resources. So there's a strong Texas resource base and evolution of the power markets and systems. So you look back to that 2013 study. Do you still see ERCOT kind of moving in that direction?
Yes, I do. But I think we are grappling more with the future of natural gas and the role of natural gas as we trend towards a decarbonized system where gas won't, for the most part, won't be able to be burned without its emissions being sequestered. So I think as of now, particularly in Texas, where you don't have a lot of impoundment hydro, large-scale hydro to balance the grid, gas is cheap. It is the balancing resource of choice. You haven't taken advantage of a flexible load nearly as much as I think your resource base is. And I think that's a very important resource for Texas to turn its attention to. And I think that will need to happen as full decarbonization comes in. But what I think we're learning about gas is that carbon capture and sequestration is becoming better and cheaper and more likely, and more in use. Alum cycle plants that can use gas. There's one under construction in Texas now. It might even be in operation at a small scale.
It's pilot stage, yeah. It's operating
pilot stage. Are able to use gas without emissions. Natural gas will, I think, become a source of clean hydrogen with its emissions sequestered. So there are a lot of pathways for gas use that decarbonize the gas itself. In addition, I'll just mention that in the interim, we're also seeing a need to reduce methane emissions from the whole gas supply chain and create responsibly sourced gas. And that's an important, essential step, because in some parts of the world, gas will be decades and decades before gas is eliminated, and probably even many decades in the US. So that's an important step. So we do see a future for gas through a number of technological pathways, but not a future in which we continue to burn gas without it being sequestered in large quantities. There will probably be some unsequestered gas burned forever in the world, but it needs to be a small amount if we want to keep ourselves from the even scarier and more dangerous storms and crises than we're already seeing across the entire world, from Portland, Oregon's heat domes to floods in China. It's remarkable, and it's worrisome.
Yeah, very, very much so. We were actually on a call recently about planned migration and climate immigrants. And what does that look like when you're talking about some of these extreme weather events and kind of climate events happening, and how our cities are preparing for that type of activity? So yeah, that's the importance of finding ways in which to reduce the amount of carbon environments is very key. And we're getting a couple questions from the audience here I'd like to kind of share. One of them here is kind of focuses on energy efficiency, grid resilience, and we kind of came into this when we were working on the City of Houston's Climate Action Plan, is whenever you're doing these types of plans, when you're deploying this new infrastructure, how do you take equity into account? How do you make sure that that all have an opportunity to participate and actively benefit, and you're not harming any population, one population versus another? How do you kind of see that in the development of the grid happening?
Well, with respect to let's just say building. Well, let me back up and first say that decarbonizing the energy system itself is an essential environmental justice move. I don't know if you saw, I happen to have this paper. I don't know if I will send this to Brett and Laura to share with everybody. There's an amazing study that just came out that looks at the PM 2.5 pollution, the exposure to PM 2.5 pollution from all sources.
Right.
That is from industrial air pollution, transportation air pollution, and all of that by race. And there is 70% greater exposure to all of this pollution from all sources, most of which are not electric sources.
Right.
To all people of color than there are to white folks. So as we electrify the economy, we change transportation to electric end uses, and we change buildings to electrify rather than gas and oil, which are very high polluting sources, particularly in indoor air quality settings. that is a giant environmental justice move, probably the single biggest one that I'm aware of. But beyond that, as we decarbonize the economy, one thing I think we need to do is couple our building decarbonization to a giant change in our housing policy and our land use policies, so that we build lots more affordable housing. I think housing and healthcare are the two greatest sources of financial inequity, and they're also tied to energy injustices and climate injustices. So I think we need to tie this to a large, affordable green housing that's decarbonized and that is located in walkable cities with better transit access and less reliance on autos and freeways that cut through communities. And those are, to me, the big elements of environmental justice tied to climate. That's kind of my own view. It's not a particularly widely shared view, but that's how I sort of see it.
I'm with you. You're speaking my language there. Absolutely. And when you look at, new housing and, improving the housing stock in general, you're talking about at least much more likely more energy efficient buildings. And you're reducing that overall energy burden and improving comfort, improving indoor air quality, and really making that a greater overall kind of benefit to the community and such. And so, absolutely. One of the things we played with actually during Winter Storm Uri, and just kind of on the equity side, is we looked at micro solar plus storage and deploying those to apartment complexes, to where it was a 1,000-watt solar storage system that provided basic necessities to individual apartments, and so they could kind of plug in cell phones, use a microwave, put some lights on, and really kind of at least have some basic necessities during that major power outage event. And so there's a lot of different kind of things to think about in ways in which we can kind of look at that equity question there. We're getting some additional prompts here from Laura, so we better stay on script here, Peter. One of the questions that we had come across was, what role should hydrogen play in decarbonizing the grid? How should we kind of further think about that? We have gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen. How do we kind of see that playing out in the next few years?
Well, transitionally, we'll have lots of forms of of hydrogen, but ultimately it needs to be fully decarbonized hydrogen. In the interim, I think gray and blue hydrogen have a role to play in building the hydrogen economy. But we need to steer clearly towards fully decarbonized hydrogen, and it has several roles to play. I think it's going to play a role in high temperature heat for industry, which doesn't have a lot of options and needs a fair amount of high temperature heat. Combustion level heat, and there are applications where electricity isn't needed. I think green hydrogen will be an important feedstock into the petrochemical industry of the future, of which Houston is really the ground zero for the whole United States. So it's an important feedstock into fertilizer and agriculture. It's an important fuel. I think it will be used as a fuel in electric generation. It will be, and as a storage medium in long-term storage medium in electric generation, and several other uses. So it has a number of uses.
You're absolutely right. And I guess and you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier here, or just in this last set of comments. BU recently released a report on clean energy manufacturing, saying that that scale is the most significant part of the hydrogen challenge. That a lot of investment has to occur there. How do you kind of see Houston fitting in that place, especially with green hydrogen manufacturing, or scaling that green hydrogen manufacturing?
Well, the really, the new, powerful new idea that has emerged on how to scale hydrogen is the idea of hydrogen hubs. And it is being really led in the United States by Melanie Kenderdine and the Energy Futures Initiative. Sure. It is also being promoted by the World Economic Forum and Accenture, which has some very good work on hydrogen hubs. And there are several other entities working on it, including some that Brett is working with in Houston. The idea is that the fastest way to scale industrial decarbonization and hydrogen use together, and also improve the economics of CCUS, so you have kind of a win-win-win, is to create hubs or centers where hydrogen production, green hydrogen production occurs with sequestration. So not some electrolysis, but also hydrogen from methane reformation and other processes, but build sequestration resources, build the pipeline infrastructure that you need, and be close to refineries and other petrochemical facilities that can use hydrogen, both for feedstock and for heat use. So you put all those things together in a hub. Houston is probably the first candidate for this in the United States. There are at least 9 other hubs that are on the EFI website and on a paper will be on the ISC website tomorrow. And there are hubs under development now in Europe, one up in Teesside in England, or Liverpool, one up, I think, in Finland and Scandinavia, and several others. So I think this is the next step in at least planning to scale hydrogen. There's many other steps. The EU has a good hydrogen strategy. DOE has a new hydrogen roadmap. The industry has an hydrogen roadmap. But that's one that I think, the hub idea, I think, is particularly intriguing.
Absolutely. And so we are running really close. I know Brett's going to come on here in a second, but I wanted to get one more quick 30-second question here for you. Not me saying it for 30 seconds, but a 30-second response. So your energy impact partners, what would you invest in if you were an entrepreneur?
And anything that is in the end use decarbonization, especially electrification. So if it's a technology that electrifies building heat or industrial fuel use or agricultural fuel, I would go there. Any of those end use start, and at Energy Impact Partners, we're seeing a lot of them. We are nowhere near as far as we need to get technologically and business model wise. So that is a really fertile, those end use tech applications are really fertile investment territory.
Well, thank you very much. So those of you that are entrepreneurs, take heed here. So thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I've really enjoyed it. And over to you, Brett.
Yeah, well, thank you, Peter and Gavin. Touched on so many topics: pillars, resilience, energy efficiency. We are working on that hydrogen hub in Houston, and look forward to working with you, Peter. I want to see the paper that you're posting. We'll be very interested in seeing that, and we are working with Melanie at EFI on the same set of issues. So we're all swimming in the same pool here. So hopefully we'll be many opportunities to work together going forward. So thank you for all you're doing and for all these amazing comments, and really look forward to collaborating with you going forward. I'd also like to thank the Renewable Energy Alliance of Houston, Kay McCall, who's been a sponsor, co-sponsor of this event. Thank you, Kay, for being part of this. And thank all of you guys out in the audience for supporting this. Our next webcast in this series will be Amy Myers-Jaffe, who many of you know from working at from her work at the Baker Institute. She's now at Tufts up there with Peter, and she's just written a new book on energy's digital future. She will be our next webcast on August the 30th. So look to see that in the coming days. In any event, thank you so much, Peter and Gavin, for a great conversation, and I look forward to continuing to collaborate. Take care, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.